Welcome to PLUSone, the series where each month I look at the free games on PlayStation Plus and tell you if they're worth the download. After all, the games may be free, but your time is valuable. Today, it's time to end off 2018. We've got 2 more games to send us off in the next year, and these 2 games couldn't be more different from one another. On one side, we have SOMA, a 2015 survival horror game made by the acclaimed team behind Amnesia. On the other, we have Iconoclasts, a 2018 Metroidvania platformer made by a sole, previously unknown developer. Well, both these games do have one thing in common, as each one will take you about 8 to 10 hours to beat, but that's as far as the similarities go. Are either of these games worth your time? Without further ado, let's find out, starting briefly with Iconoclasts. This game puts you in the shoes of Robin, a mechanic in a world dominated by a hyper-religious group known as One Concern. In this world, One Concern declares that only approved mechanics can partake in the craft, and anybody who violates this law is subject to immediate execution. In fact, just before the game begins, Robin's father was executed for exactly this. The plot, at least from what I've played, is very ham-fisted in its execution, but the concepts within are pretty well done. Early on, you enter a town, home to Robin's brother Elro, and you see firsthand the iron fist that the Concern has over its people. An allegedly limited and often rationed quantity of ivory, this world's only energy source, means that people are kept just above poverty and utter collapse to prevent them from questioning Mother, this religion's god. In the short time in this town, you see people fearing penance from the Concern, starvation, and really just fearing the future itself. Even if the dialogue isn't always particularly well written, the world around you speaks for itself in a much clearer tone. I won't dive into the plot in too much detail, but in short, Robin ends up on a crusade to take control of the planet back from the Concern. The best way I can describe this game, outside of its clearly dark and contrasting story, is cute. The art style is very bright and vibrant, the soundtrack is bouncy, hell, even the promotional art for the game looks exactly like the kind of game that most of you would probably skip by default. That's why I wanted to look at this one first, because for any fan of platformers, especially for those that like Metroidvania games, this is a sleeper hit. It's by no means perfect. For example, to pick up boxes, you have to stand on top of them and press the up button, which makes no sense to anybody who's ever held a controller before. But in spite of some questionable control decisions, this game has that same satisfying kick that the best Metroidvanias do. You'll solve fun, but admittedly pretty simple puzzles, sometimes across multiple screens. You'll fight enemies with your blast pistol, your wrench, and later even more items. You'll backtrack to old areas with your new abilities in order to unlock stronger power-ups, secrets, and even more world to explore. It's that satisfying feedback loop condensed down to its base. Fittingly, Robin can also craft tweaks that will enhance her abilities, giving her a faster movement speed, higher damage output, extra hits before she takes damage, or even better perks later on in the game. What's really neat is that these tweaks can break if you take too much damage, incentivizing a safe playstyle rather than letting you just power through the mid and late game like so many Metroidvanias of old. They're easy to fix too, so it's not too annoying, just a little kick in the pants. My only concern with Iconoclast is just a gut feeling. I just kind of have a hunch that the game is going to fall apart a bit later on. I don't think it'll ever get actively bad, but something about the puzzle design makes me think we'll get some puzzles that weren't fully thought through that'll end up being more annoying than challenging. With all that said, I think if you're a fan of platformers, especially Metroidvania games, I would say Iconoclasts is worth a +1 to your collection. The game's only 200 megabytes, so it's not going to be a big weight on your hard drive, and even if my hunch is right and it does fall apart a bit, I think it should be a fun enough time to offset that. Whatever you do, don't go for the Platinum Trophy unless you absolutely fall in love with the game, because for the final trophy, you've got to beat the game on the hardest difficulty, where one hit instantly kills you. No thanks. Alright, moving on to the reason you're probably here, SOMA. I don't have a ton to say about this game either. Usually these hidey, run away from the unstoppable killer games don't really click with me. That's why I love Alien Isolation so much, because it gives you the ability to fight back at least a little bit. However, I'll give SOMA credit because it actually gave me some Alien vibes, and that's saying a lot when I say that Alien Isolation is the greatest horror game ever made. The decrepit base you explore, the lighting, it's all classic sci-fi horror, and I love it. Well, really, I hate it, but that's why I love it. It's creepy. Going back a bit, you play as Simon, a guy who suffered brain damage from a recent car accident. Simon, desperate to cure his headaches and reverse the damage, goes to a doctor's office for an experimental brain scan. During the scan, he passes out and wakes up in a destroyed underwater base known as Pathos 2. For the rest of the game, he tries to find out where he is, why he's there, and what happened, and most importantly, he tries to find a way back home. Around the base are these creepy robots that speak with human voices, usually stammering or screaming in pain as they short circuit. And pretty quickly, you encounter enemies. The enemies are fantastically designed, with a horrifying walk cycle and relatively predictable paths and vision so that you can sneak around them and hide from them without triggering too many encounters. Which is a good thing, as encounters are the game's weak points. On the game's normal difficulty, enemies don't seem to take you down in one hit. They just run into you and knock you down, and then you get up a moment later with the enemy frustratingly close to detecting you again. Most of the time when I was detected, I would get detected again as soon as I regained control, meaning they may as well have been a one-hit kill. That's probably a nitpick, but it felt like I got hit with bad luck a few consecutive times, and after enough bad luck, it starts to feel like bad design. Now with that said, one thing I like about SOMA is that the game doesn't baby you. There were a few points where I was a bit confused as to where I should go next, but the game rarely outright tells you, instead using lighting and level design to guide you there. With the exception of a few stumbles, SOMA achieves this incredibly well. Simon doesn't talk to himself with solutions to problems, basic or otherwise, and as far as I saw, there was no journal for him to write down specific notes. For example, if you grab a Pathos 2 employee ID to log into a computer, you've got to remember that 4-digit number yourself. The game isn't gonna do it for you. If juggling memorization and hiding from enemies is too much for you, thankfully there is an easy mode that was added in after the game's launch, which turns all enemy encounters into pure jump scares. I really respect that touch, as a lot of people are just looking for the scares, and not for the frustration of dying and reloading the game. I can't say I blame them in SOMA's case either, because the load times in this game are really bad. Not only does the game take up to a full minute to boot up at launch, the loading zones are sprinkled in throughout the interconnected world. So the game very frequently stops for up to another couple seconds to load the area ahead of you, or even just to save your progress. It's incredibly distracting and took me out of the experience right away every time it happened. If not for these loading issues, I would say the game would be a perfect fit for a PSVR release, provided they could even get SOMA to run at 90 frames per second, of course. The somewhat wonky controls are already similar to what you would expect in VR, with a lot of items you can pick up, examine, and throw with the triggers, the usual horror game lean around a corner mechanic, and a questionable emphasis on using R2 and the right stick together to open doors or curtains. A lot of this would translate really well to VR, but it seems like that's gonna have to be a request for the developer's next game at this point. I think SOMA is, even with its flaws, an easy +1 for anybody looking for a solid horror game. I know this one has a very dedicated fanbase, and from what I've played, I can see why. It's not easy to translate from one subgenre to another as a horror developer, but Frictional transitioned from Amnesia to SOMA seemingly with ease. At about 12 gigabytes in size, it's not a huge file, so you hopefully shouldn't need to make too much space. And for you trophy hunters out there, this is a no-brainer, as you pretty much platinum the game by default just by beating it. Whew, this one went a bit longer than I expected, but hey, if you enjoyed this slightly longer video, sound off down in the comments below. In the past, I've thought about trying to review a whole month of PS Plus titles in one video rather than always doing them separately, so if that sounds like something you'd want to see, let me know. And if you're watching this video in 2019 and beyond, SOMA runs $30 at its regular price, and Iconoclasts goes for $20. I think you'd be best off waiting for a sale on both games. $15 is about as high as I would go for Iconoclasts, and $20 sounds fair enough for SOMA, even if it's not usually my type of game. With all that said, even if +1's done for the year, stay tuned for the next couple weeks here on the Golden Bolt, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as I've got a few more videos lined up before 2018 ends, including one that will hopefully answer every question you've ever had about PlayStation Plus.